Ferdinand de Saussure talked about semiology as a study of science, S-I-G-N-S, study of science, and hence semiology gets its name. And this is a term which is used in Europe a great deal. In the United States of America, the term which became popular was semiotics, and it owes something to the use of this term by Charles Peirce. For Peirce, semiotics was also a way of acquiring knowledge. It was also related to logic, and it was a very comprehensive system of science. And he talked about various combinations, various permutations of science. So if we look at his work, we see that he talks about a whole system of science. Saussure did not talk about semiology a great deal. Rather, there is one simple paragraph in his work. And in that paragraph, he talks about the creation of one particular branch of study, which can be called semiology. And this branch of study will also derive something from linguistics, but ultimately linguistics will become part of this bigger project, that is semiology. So that is how Ferdinand de Saussure just shared that insight, and it was communicated just a paragraph. It was only later that one very important interpreter of Ferdinand de Saussure, and it was Rene Barthes, who took up the challenge of expanding the insights of Ferdinand de Saussure, and the result is a science which has been expanding, a study which has been expanding, and gradually the study has expanded so much that it has become almost similar, or it is coterminous, or it is almost equivalent to the study of communications of all kinds. And that means there are some sub branches which have emerged from semiotics. I mentioned some of those sub branches. One is kinesics, which is a study of facial expressions, which is a study of posture, which is a study of, to use a popular term, body language. And there is also another branch which is called proxemics, where we study space, space in the public domain and space in terms of interpersonal relationships. We discussed this point yesterday. So if we move further from that point and we talk about language and the relationship between semiotics and language, then we can say that semiotics expands the notion of language. It stretches the concept of language. Language is not simply that which we speak or which we write, but this can be stretched further to include different kinds of languages which communicate in different ways. That means all our life is surrounded by this kind of communication. All of our life is surrounded by the messages that we receive and the messages that we deliver. And so if you see, then there are different kinds of speech acts. When you wear a particular kind of dress, it is also a kind of speech act. When you have a particular kind of posture, that is also a kind of speech act. And similarly, people also communicate through their through their hairstyles. They can communicate through the use of certain perfumes. They can communicate through the use of say clothing, and also sometimes accent, how they speak, and also maybe all kinds of things, how they dress up, how they speak, where they live, how they arrange their house, how houses are built. In other words, our life is surrounded by all those messages. And if we see further, then you also see that there are lights which are going off and lights which are going in, different kinds of lights, different lights have different colors, they also communicate. And also sometimes those sounds that you hear, that means if you are sitting and you see a particular sound and you know that it is the police patrolling the area, so that particular sound also communicates a message. If you hear the sound of ambulance, then it also communicates. And similarly, there are different kinds of sounds, and they all communicate in different ways. We'll, we'll see that how all these different languages derive their basic impetus from language, which is English, language which is Urdu, language which is Hindi, which you can call a language system, a language system. And these are different kinds of languages. If you can put the word languages in single commas, that means we have a special meaning of the word language here. So the concept of language is stretched further and further to include colors, to include sounds, to include lifestyles, to include perfumes, to include organization of space, and so on. And even the sound that is coming from the background, that is also communicating something, right? If suppose there is the whistle of the cooker, that also communicates something. So that means there are all these sounds and they all communicate something. Now Peirce is known for creating different categories, but here we can talk about only few. And here if you see these notes, Ashraf, can you put these notes on the screen if possible, maybe, so that others can see those notes before them? Okay, in these notes there are 4 terms which are written here. And what are those terms? But before I talk about the terms which are used by Charles Peirce, we can go back to that basic terminology which was used by Ferdinand de Saussure. And what was that? Signifier and signified. We should be very clear about the meaning of signifier and the meaning of signified. So once again, maybe signifier is a sound image, a sound image. And signified is the concept or the meaning which is attached to that sound image. So if I say a glass, and the glass is here, and you see it is the concept. The word glass is a signifier, but what it signifies is this, and this is the concept that is in my mind. And since language is also kind of social affair, so the word glass has a particular concept attached to it, and all those social users of language also think about this glass. There can be some, say, points of departures also. You can think about a different shape of the glass. You can think about a different material which that glass may be made of, right? So that as was shown by, yes. Thank you, Ashraf. Not this, not this. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the notes which I sent you on WhatsApp. Maybe we'll come to this later. Now here, 4 terms are important, which Charles Peirce used. But before those terms, I talked about signifier and signified. And Roman Jakobson also used 2 terms. And what are those 2 terms which are similar to the terms which were used by Ferdinand de Saussure? These 2 terms are signans and signatum. Signans, signifier, and signatum, signified. So it is not too different from the terms which are used by Saussure. But Charles Peirce uses 4 interesting terms. And here it is important for us. I think I said we can do without also. If I am speaking, I think I'm clear here. Here we must be learning some terminology. And as I have said again and again, this terminology is also kind of toolbox in the hands of our young researchers. What are those two? What are those four terms? One is representation, the other is object, the third term is interpretant, and the fourth term is ground. That means representation, object, interpretant, and ground. They are involved in a process of semiosis. That means where a sign is there and sign creates some kind of meaning. And since semiology or semiotics is a study of signs, S-I-G-N-S, signs. So what are these four elements? Representation, object, interpretant, and ground. Now let us see it this way. A sign or representation, say for example, if Sosu is using the word, say, sign, and here the word is representation. Suppose what happens, a representation stands for something. Okay, a representation stands for something. So if I say glass, glass is representation, right? Glass is representation. It stands for something. Now it stands for this, and maybe Munira can also say show her glass. Okay, so if I said glass, glass was representation, and the glass represents this object. That is this object, and it stands for this object for an interpretant. That means only if a person knows the meaning of the word glass can he interpret it as glass. So it stands for somebody, and then it stands for somebody on some ground. That means a certain context. So here this chain is complete, where we begin by using a signifier, glass. It represents one object, which is this, and it means something to an interpretant, somebody who interprets, and on some ground. So these are the terms. And what is further important in Charles Peirce, and it is extremely important in any study of semiotics, he created number of categories, but three of his terms, three of those concepts have become very important, and you will find them in most books. So he emphasizes relationship between sign and object. So for example, there is a sign, and there is an object, sign and object. So this relationship is emphasized in three different ways by Peirce. By using the concept of icon, by using the concept of index, and by using the concept of symbol. Icon, index, and symbol. Now, where you have icon, that means the object and its sign. In icon, the sign resembles the object. The sign resembles the object. So for example, if there is a photograph of your mother, then that photograph and your mother, that is, the photograph resembles your mother. If somebody paints a picture, then the person shown in that picture and the actual person, they are the same, or rather they are similar. So when you have this iconic relationship between an object and a sign, that means where you have a sign and you say that this sign is iconic in nature. Here it means that they resemble. They resemble. So a photograph, so a painting, or for that matter, even a kind of sketch of a person, that is an icon. Usually, what happens if you see television serials or if you see films, you see that there those images, they are the same as are those signs. So if we think about a glass, if we think about a glass and a glass is shown on the screen, then it should be that glass, right? On the other hand, there is also a different kind of relationship between an object and the sign. And what is that relationship? This relationship is called indexical relationship. Index. So that means icon, index, and symbol. These are three important terms. And you can have iconic relationship between a sign and an object. You can have indexical relationship between a sign and object, and you can have symbolic relationship between a sign and its object. So if we explain the concept of index, or if we explain the concept of indexical signs, you can have iconic sign and you can have indexical signs. In index, the relationship is based on a kind of cause and effect or some kind of sequence. Okay, suppose you are sitting in your room and there is a very heavy knock outside on your door. Now that knock suggests that maybe somebody is outside. Somebody is outside. So that knock is an index of somebody's presence. If knock is there and that knock is the cause, or it is an index of somebody's relationship. Similarly, if you are sitting, maybe attending your class, and suddenly you see that there is smoke rising from a corner, and that smoke suggests that maybe it is an index of fire, right? Similarly, if you are sitting attending your classes and outside you hear a horn, that horn of a car is an index of that car outside. So indexical relationship is that relationship where you have a cause and effect relationship or causal relationship or sequential relationship between a sign and the object. I'll come back to this point. This is an important point. Third important relationship is symbolic relationship. Okay, symbolic relationship. What is the meaning of symbolic relationship? What is the meaning of symbolic relationship? Okay, let me just ask you one question. And I'm asking this question maybe in Urdu, and maybe I'll translate that also. You must be fond of eating. You must be fond of eating different things. If I ask you, आपने बिनौले की खीर खाई है? How many of you know the meaning of the word binola? Just raise. I'll be very surprised. Okay. बिनौले की खीर. Who would answer this question? What is binola? Most of you are Urdu speaking people, or at least you have familiarity with Urdu. So what is binola? Anyone? Okay. Probably you have not eaten that. But the word Binola simply stumped you. And of course, it is not the name of any animal or insect. Please don't think that I'm talking about an animal or insect, although it looks like Neola or something. It's not. Binola actually refers to cotton seeds. So you have that tree of cotton, and in that tree of cotton, you have that cotton flower. And if you just open that cotton flower, you'll find those seeds. And those seeds were often used to prepare this dish. I don't know, there was say so much hard work into it, but the taste somehow did not reward that hard work. But of course, it is something which comes from a bygone era. But the fact is that you were stumped by this word Vinoda. That means there is one example, and that example is the example of language, where the relationship between a sign and its object is symbolic relationship, purely arbitrary relationship. So if I say glass, glass does not have any glassness about it, right? A glass, or if I say table, then table does not have any tableness about it. The word table could have been used to refer to maybe your ice cream. So you can go to a shop and say, oh, I need 5 tables. And the shopkeeper understand, oh, you are talking about 5, but do you like this, say, which flavor of table do you want?
Strawberry table.
Right. So that is here also the very fact that we use the word table, and the word table means a particular kind of say object which has some legs, which is used to put things. This is a purely conventional relationship based on custom. The very fact that we called this table and the other object chair, it could have been other way around also. It could have been other way around also. So in language, you always have a kind of symbolic relationship between words and objects. And when we say symbolic relationships, we are saying that this relationship is purely arbitrary, without any reason, based on convention. Right. So that means if we decide to use a different word for a table, we cannot do that because language is also a social affair. There is no place for idiolect in something which is a kind of social affair. And so if I say table, others understand it. But if somebody uses a different word for table, maybe if a Telugu word for table or Tamil word, what are those Telugu and Tamil words, Munira, for table? Table?
Table only. I mean,
Okay, so maybe those words have been adopted. In Urdu, we can say maze, fine. But if we say maze, and if you are in England or in US and you enter a furniture shop, you say, "Mujhe maze chahiye." That person may not understand the meaning of the word maze because this
it'll
relationship,
be a grain for him.
yeah, this
It'll
relationship,
be a grain for him.
yes, yes, because this relationship is arbitrary. So when Peirce talks about these 3 different kinds of signs, one is iconic sign, one is indexical sign, and one is symbolic sign. So that means icon, index, and symbol. Icon is based on resemblance, a painting, a photograph, a sketch, resemblance. Index is based on a kind of causal relationship, a kind of sequential relationship. Knock at the door, somebody outside. Horn outside, maybe a car. Smoke there, maybe fire. So these are important sign, and of course symbol. In symbol, it is always very, it is a very arbitrary nature of sign. Now, who is the most important interpreter of all, or who applies these concept of semiotics to everyday life? And here the name of Rene Barthes becomes very important, right? Now, when Rene Barthes we have already discussed, and I have also sent you an image where you can see Rene Barthes talking about myths, and also Rene Barthes talking about certain, say, uses of Saussure concepts, and he uses those concepts in a different context. So, for example, when he studies garment system, when he studies fashion, when he studies food, when he studies furniture, and he sees that it can also behave like language. So, furniture, all those items of furniture, they can also behave like a language. Menu in a restaurant, or food items, or say a particular course of dinner, it can also behave like a language, like a language. And similarly, garment system can also behave like a language. So important thing here is that various linguistic terms are used by Barthes, and all those various linguistic terms are pressed into the service of observation of everyday life. All those linguistic terms. We made this point earlier also, that you talk about different languages. You have the linguistic system, English, Hindi, Urdu, but there are other languages which compete with this system. There are also non-verbal systems which behave like a language. And here we can use the word language in simple commas. So we take up Barthes in our next session, especially his discussion of semiology, because he has also written a book titled Semiology, Elements of Semiology, taking inspiration from Ferdinand de Saussure. And later we'll also see that how semiotics is used, or it becomes an important approach, especially in all those disciplines where image is important, where picture is important. And that means we would see its use in television and cinema. So we end this session here, but of course you can offer a comment or two quickly, because we don't have much time. Yes, somebody.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I have one question. I am Alia, and my question is, can we say that the larger the social space a person is occupied, or the larger the space the person occupy in social context, the more power it has in the present scenario? If we see, is it justifiable?
Yes, actually, in a way that suggests something. In the last session, we started discussing Rene Barthes as an important interpreter of Ferdinand de Saussure. And as I have said this earlier also, that Barthes talks about the myths of his times. He talks about all possible aspects of French life which he observed and which he tried to observe, and there he used those concepts of linguistics to offer comments, to offer his critique, and to offer his analysis. His book titled Mythology, it offers very interesting readings of many of those myths of his times. When we use the word myth here, we are talking about some ideas which are considered natural in his time. So much so that they were not even questioned. We are not using the word myth here in its classical sense, where myth suggested all those stories, half true, which are handed down to us from the Greek period. So myths in Greek mythology. We are not talking about those myths. We are talking about some contemporary ideas. And Barth talked about those ideas. Further, Barth wrote a short book, Element of Semiology. And in Elements of Semiology, this is a short book, not very thick. In this book, Barth took off where Saussure had left. But what Barth said about Saussure is that Saussure is wrong when he says that linguistics is part of semiotics. He rather puts this idea on its head. He says that semiotics uses the concepts of linguistics. So it is not that semiotics is a bigger project, but rather linguistics remains a kind of discipline which provides rich ideas to semiotics and to many other branches of semiotics. Barth studied fashion. Barth studied menus. Barth studied food systems. And there he used the concept of syntagmatic and paradigmatic to talk about those things. Right. I have sent you an image where you have furniture, where you have different kinds of foods, where you have menus, and you see that how they can be read in a syntagmatic manner and they can be read in paradigmatic manner. That means those things also behave like a language, and we are using this concept that in semiotics, language is stretched to its limits to include many other forms of life which behave like a language. So furniture system. So different items of foods. Think about any dinner which may begin with some kind of starters, and then the starters are followed by the main course, and then the main course is followed by dessert, and the dessert is followed by some kind of beverage, say whether hot or cold. On the other hand, if this entire thing is turned on its head and you order first dessert and you have the main course at the end, that means one is breaking the grammar of that food system, and this grammar comes into picture. This grammar originates in a particular setup, in a particular culture. Similarly, you enter a furniture shop and you have only tables, and you use all those tables in your drawing room. Of course, one can sit on a table also, and many teachers do love to sit on the table when they teach. So, but that again is a possibility, but that again is ungrammatical if we think in terms of this system of furniture, which follows certain rules and which can behave like a language. Similarly, we can talk about some other systems also. And Barth mentioned those systems. Clothing, for example. Yesterday I sent you a write-up which I had written a few years ago when the film PK was released. Then in that film, you also see that PK dresses up in a very funny manner. He wears a skirt, and he also wears a shirt. So that means there is one item of clothing which come from women's clothing and one from men's. Again, this is technically possible, but in terms of the grammar of clothes, this is don't send me Munira now. In terms of the grammar of fashion, in terms of the grammar of clothing, it will become ungrammatical. And so when Barthes is using those concepts from Ferdinand de Saussure, he extends the use of those concepts. And what I said at the beginning, that language is stretched to its limit to include many other systems which behave like a language. And so in this respect, Barthes is important. Another very important thing that Barthes has done is he talks about that category which is introduced by Saussure, but he further enriches that. And let us think about this. This is a bit difficult to explain. You see, a linguistic sign consists of signifier and signified. A linguistic sign consists of signifier and signified. But when we think about, and this is what, when we think about its use elsewhere, that means when we talk about non-linguistic sign, in non-linguistic sign, Barthes advances a different kind of terminology. And what is that terminology? There, simply the word sign can be used. Simply the word sign can be used. And sign has a signifier and it has a signified. And Barthes gives one example. Barthes gives the example of a bunch of roses. A bunch of roses. In the culture in which Barthes grew up, and of course that aspect of culture is also universal. Bunch of flowers represents something. It represents passion. Barthes is saying that it represents passion. That means when bunch of flowers represents passion, it also means that this signifier, bunch of flowers represents, all the time there are so many other messages they disturb. I'm sorry for this little interruption. I was talking about bunch of flowers, which is used as an example by Barthes. So bunch of flowers is a signifier, and it signifies something. It signified is passion, right? And it becomes a sign. It becomes a sign, and it a bunch of roses signifies passion, right? A bunch of roses signifies passion. So that means as a signifier, you have bunch of roses, and as it signified, you have passion, and then it constitutes the total picture constitutes sign. Sign means a signifier, and it's signified. And here signified is bunch of roses and signified is passion. But about this term bunch of roses as a kind of horticultural image, then probably a bunch of roses is just bunch of roses. So why is it that bunch of roses becomes a symbol of love? Why is it that it indicates passion? And here Barthes is saying that this happens because of my intent, my personal intent, and because of our society's intent. That means the collective intent, my intent and society's intent has imbued bunch of roses with a particular meaning. And what is that meaning? That meaning is passion, right? So that means as as a sign, bunch of roses is full. As a sign, bunch of roses is full. But as simply a signifier where it referred to, say, some flowers, it is just empty. So what makes it full? What makes this sign full? My intent and certain conventions in society. So bunch of roses, because there are conventions in society where roses suggest those tender feelings, roses suggest that idea of love, and so the sign becomes full. Are you getting me? The sign becomes full because of the intent of the person who uses that, and also because of certain conventions in society where a particular kind of response means something. Now I'm giving you one or two examples which immediately came to my mind. Some funny examples also, but they will prove the point. There was an old film, Amitabh Bachchan film, Satya Pe Satta, and the hero is visiting the heroine for the first time, and what he takes with him is a melon, right? And she throws that melon away. Now, who presents a tarboos to his beloved on the first meeting? And she throws that, right? Why is it? It was funny, but what caused this laughter? What made it funny? And maybe before I talk about it, I must give another example. Yesterday, when I was thinking about it, I looked for another example. There was a recent film, Once Upon a Time in Mumbai. Ajay Devgan, and there you have Kangana Ranaut, who is an important Bollywood heroine. In that film, she is playing an actress in that film also. Ajay Devgan wants to see her. Ajay Devgan wants to meet her, and he is sitting at the back seat in his car. The driver notices this thing. Okay, you are going to meet your beloved, and says that don't go just empty-handed. Take something with you. Now, at that particular point, there was no shop around. So what Ajay Devgan saw was there was say a person on a trolley. He was selling guavas, and Ajay Devgan picked up one guava. Say, how much is this for? He said, 4 Anna. And then he picked up another guava. This was a very big guava. He said, and what is its cost? And he said, it's still the same. And Ajay Devgan is a bit disappointed. The reason is that he wants to give a very expensive gift to somebody he's going to meet for the first time, and there is no expensive gift around. And then he's ask him a question. Okay, suppose this is the last guava in the world. Then how much would it give? What will be its price? And he says 60 rupees. And then he says, okay, suppose this is that guava which say Eve ate and something. What is its price then? And he says 400. He meets Kangana Ranaut, and he also says that I have bought this guava for 400 rupees. Okay, now these scenes may be funny, but important thing to note about these scenes is that say a bunch of roses probably would not have cost much, or even a simple flower, a simple say rose would not have cost much. But there is that conventional meaning which is attached to that rose, which is not attached to guava, which is not attached to, for that matter, that watermelon. And hence you see that as a sign system, guava is simply guava. It is empty. but as a sign, a rose, bunch of roses is full, because it also means love. It also means passion. It also means those tender feelings attached to it. Now from here, I hope you understand the difference between a sign which is full and a sign which is empty. What Barth further says is that when we study those myths, myths operate on a second level also, where the sign of the first system, which is full, it becomes an empty sign at the beginning in the second system. Let me just explain you this. Barth talks about two examples. He picks up two lines from two fashion magazines. And what are those two lines? One line is, prints win at the races. Prints win at the races. And another line is, slim piping is striking. Prints win at the races. Slim piping is striking. I hope you understand these two different kinds of clothing. What is piping? What is piping? And what is print? Probably you understand print. And you see that. And I see that Ehsanul Haq is wearing something which is very close to piping. Am I right? Ehsan is wearing something which is very close to piping, where you have those, say, lines maybe, say, on the edges of a dress. And print, of course, you are better familiar with print. There can be a season where prints may be important, and there can be a season where, say, that say piping may be important. So when Barth studies these things, so what happens is that simply the word print, which in the first order suggested say style, but when it operates as a myth, it also relates to a particular kind of worldview, where simply the word print will carry a meaning. And what is that meaning? Print means it creates elegance, and simply by wearing print you are part of that elegance, and you are also part of that kind of winning instinct. Prints win. So the very fact that a particular object was used as a sign where it was full, but second time you don't have to say that prints win. Simply print suggests that idea. And in the culture around us, there are many ideas which appear almost natural. Okay, a certain kind of dress, okay, it suggests this. A certain kind of talk, it suggests this. So Barth was basically trying to attack the creation of those myths which appeared natural in his times. And his view was that all possible signs, all possible things in society, all possible myths, they were conventional. Those meanings originated in the world. There was nothing natural about them. And he tried to talk about first that sign, and then say signs which are used in the creation of those myths. So myths order at the second level. Here, if we see further, and we know that Barth is important there, but there is yet another concept which is also used by Barth. What happens here is that Barth is talking about signification. And I think here you'll have to read a little bit, because we are not talking in great detail about Barth at this point. Barth also talks about the processes of denotation and connotation. Denotation and connotation. And again, these are two important concepts in semiotics, denotation and connotation. These are also important concepts in film theory. So from this discussion, what emerges is that human being basically produce signs, and all our senses are pressed into service when we make these signs. And here two signs are especially very important. Two sign systems are especially very important. And this is an opinion of Roman Jakobson also. One is the auditory system, where you hear something, and the other is the visual system. So that means you have those visual signs and you have those auditory signs. If you think about those auditory signs, then it gives birth to certain art forms, and music is probably the most important example of that art form. Auditory sign, say, is temporal in nature. That means it takes place in time. Music you hear and it takes place in time. Whereas visual signs, they are essentially spatial. That means they exist in space, visual signs. What are some of the art forms which are an example of visual sign? And you see that painting, sculpture, architecture, these are important aspects of visual signs. But there are some art forms which combine the two, and cinema and television and opera, they combine visual as well as auditory signs. So auditory sign takes place in time. It is temporal in nature. And visual sign takes place in space, and it is spatial in nature. Spatial, space, temporal, time. But there are some art forms which combine the two. So again, to repeat this point, music is probably the best example of auditory sign system, and it is essentially symbolic in nature. It is temporal in nature. It exists in time. Whereas those visual signs, they are based on space. In other words, they are spatial in nature. Think about architecture. Think about sculpture. Think about paintings. They, say, are put in some kind of space. You don't have galleries for keeping music, but you do have galleries for those sculptures, those paintings, right? And as far as cinema and television are concerned, or opera, these are art forms which use both space and time. Okay, now some last points, because this can be a subject in its own right, but I'll very briefly touch. But if you ask me, maybe I can discuss it in another session, but not tomorrow. Tomorrow we are, say, discussing all these important subjects. So very quickly, I must say that film is also like a language. And one very important film theorist was Christian Metz. He talked about films as a kind of language. There also you have signifier and signified, but in cinema, signifier and signified are identical. So if I say a book, you see only a book on the screen. And that's why when a book is shown, whatever be your language, because in different cultures you have this concept of book, you can possibly see the same thing. So in cinema, what happens is that we see the same thing, and there usually the signs which are shown are, they are iconic in nature. There is resemblance between the object and the sign. So if we see a film with subtitles, even if we don't have subtitles and we see a foreign language film, we can possibly recognize those things. We can probably understand most of those things. We can identify all those objects because they are iconic in nature. Resemblance is there. On the other hand, in cinema, you also have use of indexical signs. And this is a place where cinema can be very, very inventive. Because if cinema uses all those symbolic signs which are used in literature, cinema loses its quality. It looks very pretentious. But the beauty lies in a director's use of those indexical signs. Yesterday I was watching a film, an old Hollywood film, and at the very beginning was shown, say, a thermometer which revealed the temperature, and it was reading temperature in Fahrenheit, and it was showing 100 and at one point 120. So obviously when the temperature is 100 or 110 and that thermometer was showing that, there was focus on thermometer, you can understand that it was an indexical sign. Thermometer showing 110 and people sweating, perspiring, that was an indexical sign which, without saying a word, suggested that it was very hot. What is the other way? The character can say, okay, I'm feeling very hot. But think about the time when you had only silent films. So these indexical signs were very important during the period of those silent films. So what you can say is that cinema uses iconic signs. It occasionally will use symbolic signs. It will use indexical signs. And there is one particular area where semiotics has been applied in cinema, and that is in what is called montage. That is what is called editing. That means cinema has its own system, its own codes. And where do those codes operate? Especially in how certain things are mixed up, how certain things are edited. So that is basically important. And of course, we also use the concepts of denotative and connotative meaning in cinema. And it is said by Christian Metz that by its very nature, everything in cinema is also connotative at the same time as it is denotative. Denotative means where you see only what is there. Connotative, there is a deeper meaning, right? So we conclude our discussion of semiotics on this note.